The chef froze, because the stew he served carried a secret. "Welcome to Dunkelsenke. I am your host, Thornwick. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from today. Your messages always make these mysteries richer. Now let's begin. I've seen men jump at guns, subpoenas, and wives, and in one memorable instance, a Peking G's, but this one kept cutting glances toward the kitchen like it housed a firing squad instead of Fritz Brenner and a 12-quart aluminum kettle. "I beg you," he said, fingers pressing together so hard his knuckles whitened. "You must not let him serve it. Not tonight. Not to those people." If you know anything about Nero Wolfe, you know that telling him what he must do in his own house ranks just below tracking mud on the parquet and just above sitting in his yellow chair without permission. I was standing by the office door, half blocking it in case our visitor worked himself up to a dramatic exit and needed shepherding. Wolfe was in his proper place behind his desk, a mountain of brown and bulk with only his eyes really moving. Those eyes narrowed. "You came," Wolfe said, "because Mr. Goodwin told you I might listen if the matter concerned food. That is already a liberty. Now you presume to dictate my conduct with my own cook in my own kitchen. Sit down, Mr. Liozzi, or go and be frightened elsewhere." The man swallowed. He was 35 or so, with a chef's forearms and a tailor's conscience. The suit was dark navy, the shirt cream, and the tie a mistake. Under less strain, he could have passed for a banker or a second-string movie actor. As it was, the way his eyes kept jerking toward the door to the hall like he expected the stew to come sloshing through, he looked like a rabbit that had found itself in a family photograph by accident. "I'm sorry," he said, and sat. Not in the red chair. No one sits in the red leather chair on the right except visitors with either nerve or ignorance, but in the yellow one. So he wasn't hopeless. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I know what you will think. You will think that it is. What is your word? Neurotic, but it is not. I'm a chef. I know when something is wrong in a kitchen, and something is wrong in yours, Mr. Wolfe, and in mine." Wolfe let out a breath that would have been a sigh if it contained more feeling. "My kitchen," he said, "contains Fritz Brenner, who has cooked in this house for 22 years. It contains my stove, my copper, my oils and vinegars, my knives, and my ingredients, purchased personally by Fritz within strict instruction and habitual compliance. It is the most orderly, best-governed part of this house. The only thing wrong in it at the moment is that you," he pointed a finger like he was tagging a specimen, "were in it. That was my doing. I put in, since if anyone was going to take the blame, I might as well get credit for initiative." He was on the stoop with a folded toque and a story that started with Fritz's name. I weighed the risk of letting him ring the bell 3 more times against letting him talk to Fritz and made the call. "Your weighing," Wolfe said, "is frequently regrettable but occasionally serviceable. We shall see which this is." He swung his gaze back to our visitor. "State it again, simply." The man licked his lips. "I am Marco Liozzi. For 5 years I have been executive chef at La Fiamma on East 53rd. Before that, sous chef at—" "Stop," Wolfe said. "Your professional pedigree addresses the competence with which you apprehend sources, not danger. The facts, Mr. Liozzi." "All right." Liozzi dug his fingers into his knees like he was kneading dough. "There is a dinner tonight, at La Fiamma, 10 o'clock, a private party, 8 people. They have not used their names in the reservation, only a contact, an assistant perhaps, but I know—" His voice sharpened. "I know they are men with money, with enemies, and with the kind of power that does not call the police. That describes," I offered, "most of the customers who order the expensive wine list." He glanced at me, then nodded. "Yes, but they are more. I do not know exactly who, but I know enough. One of my suppliers, he talks, he warns me. I have seen faces in the dining room, whispered tables. I do not ask questions. I cook." He hesitated, then pushed forward. For this dinner, they demanded a special menu, 6 courses. They specified the final course, a venison stew, Barolo-based, with juniper. They sent the recipe. Wolfe's brows tugged a fraction of an inch closer. That's about as far as his face goes in the direction of disapproval before lunch. Someone, Wolfe said, sent you a recipe. Yes. To use in your restaurant. Yes. He flushed, either from shame or remembered annoyance. I know. It is an insult. I'm not a line cook from a hotel banquet hall, but these men, they do not ask, they command. So I looked at their recipe. It was, he groped for a word, competent but unnecessary. I could improve it. That is not what frightened me. What did? I asked. He leaned even closer. 2 nights ago, I was finishing the base, the first trial batch. I tasted it. It was perfect, more than the recipe, my own hand. I left the kitchen for 15 minutes. There was a call, some foolishness with delivery paperwork. When I came back, I stirred. I tasted again, and I knew someone had changed it. He stopped. Wolfe, who hates repetition almost as much as he hates being hurried, allowed a full 10 seconds to pass. Changed it how? He said. The salt was wrong, Marco said promptly. Not too much, not too little. Different. I use fleur de sel at that stage. Always. It blooms differently. This was sharper, harsh on the tongue, and there was something else, an aftertaste in the back of the throat. I spat. I did not swallow you. Understand. But it was there. Metallic. Faint, like... He opened his hands helplessly. Like what? Wolfe asked. Like fear, he said. Wolfe's lips compressed. You tasted fear. I'm trying to explain, Marco said hotly. I'm a chef, not a chemist. I cannot tell you exactly what compound, what powder or essence. But I know when something does not belong. I emptied the pot into the sink. I scoured it myself. I started again. I told my sous chef and my garde-manger they must not leave the base unattended. Yesterday, it happened again. Not with me, with my sous chef. He is good, careful. He tasted something. He could not say what. He is not as precise as me. But he came to me white-faced. He said, Marco, someone is playing with us. Us? I asked. In the kitchen, Marco snapped. With the food, with the stew. They are waiting to do something. Tonight. So you, Wolfe said, being a man of measured judgment and decorous reaction, abandoned your restaurant, came uptown, and importuned Fritz Brenner at my back door. Front door, I said. He rang like a man who believed in bells. Marco shook his head impatiently. I did not abandon anything. I left my sous chef in charge. The mise is already done, the stock reduced, the venison marinating. I will go back. I had to come now, because this morning I discovered the spice. Wolfe's head moved a fraction. If you weren't trained, you'd think it hadn't moved at all. What spice? He asked. Your spice, Marco said, and now he did look toward the door. Your nutmeg, in your kitchen. It was, how do you say, wrong. Now it was my turn to feel something shift in the room. The air didn't actually get colder, but it felt that way. Wolfe's kitchen is not a democracy. It is barely a constitutional monarchy. If you told me Fritz had a coronation outfit in one of his closet drawers, I'd believe it. The idea that some outsider, even a fellow professional, had been poking around the spice shelf was already a sacrilege. The idea that something there was wrong was a step past sacrilege, into something that would make the deity of order behind the desk grumpy. Wolfe said very quietly, Explain yourself with extreme care. Marco ran a hand over his face. I asked Mr. Goodwin if I might watch your cook prepare lunch. He was kind enough to introduce us. I've admired Mr. Brenner's work for a long time. His source is facts, Wolfe said. Yes, facts. Marco swallowed. He was making a bechamel variant with nutmeg. He took the jar down, measured, salted, stirred. I watched his hand. I saw the label. Noix de Muscade. I recognized the jar. He paused. We use the same brand at La Fayama, you see. Same importer. Same jar. I know its weight in my hand. I know the smell when you open it. But when he reached for it, it did not look right. Not the jar. What was inside? It clumped. It was too fine. I thought, perhaps his is ground more finely than ours. I said nothing. And then, Wolfe's voice hadn't risen in pitch or volume, but it had acquired an edge that made me very glad I wasn't a nutmeg jar. Then he put the spoon back in and tapped the jar, Marco said. A little puff rose. I smelled it, only for a second. But it was not nutmeg. Not only nutmeg. Again that other smell, like in my stew. Something bitter underneath. I'm sure of it. He continued cooking. He did not notice. He has cooked for you for many years. He knows your spices better than I know my own breath. But you see, it is always the same. The stew, the spice. Someone is using the kitchen. Mine and now yours. And I think, you think, Wolfe said. What? Marco gripped the arms of the yellow chair. I think someone is going to poison that stew tonight at La Fiamma. I think they have already tested the method, in my kitchen, perhaps in others. And now, they have tested it here, in your house. If he'd announced that the Statue of Liberty had moved to Cleveland, Wolfe's expression would not have changed appreciably. But his eyes flicked once toward the inner hallway where, a few doors down, the door to the kitchen stood solid and shut. Archie, he said, did Fritz mention any oddity? Not unless you count an extra sprig of thyme as moral decay, I said. He was his usual self, muttering in Swiss German at the sink, humming at the stove. He did ask if this gentleman was staying to lunch. Marco closed his eyes briefly. I'm sorry, he said again. I did not know how else to make you listen. You could have, Wolfe suggested, refrained from trespassing on my kitchen. You could have remained in your own and observed your own staff. You could have, in short, done your work. Instead, you come here, stamp fear about like mud, and offer me this farrago. Bah. He flicked his hand, a brushing away gesture. It is preposterous. Poison, yes, exists. People attempt it, with varying degrees of competence and result. But this notion that some mastermind, he invested the word with more scorn than most men reserve for taxes, is gallivanting from kitchen to kitchen, adulterating condiments in test runs, and that he has chosen my house as a proving ground? Fiddle-faddle. Marco's shoulders drooped, then stiffened. You do not believe me, he said. I believe you are frightened, Wolfe said. I believe you are, within your limited realm, observant. I do not believe all your inferences. Still, he closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. The decision was made somewhere in there. Still, what you allege, if not wholly nonsense, is intolerable. The idea that someone has tampered with my nutmeg is... He stopped, nostrils flaring once. Intolerable, he repeated. He turned to me. Archie, go to the kitchen. Bring me the nutmeg jar Mr. Brenner used for the EZE, bechamel, and another from the same supplier. Also, Fritz. 2 jars and 1 Fritz, I said. Right away. I went, leaving Marco sitting tight-lipped and Wolfe apparently studying him as if he were a new and mildly offensive species of mollusk. Fritz was by the stove, supervising a pan of something that smelled like heaven's deli counter. Fritz, I said, Mr. Wolfe would like you, plus your nutmeg in the office. Don't keep him waiting. He's in a mood. Fritz turned, eyebrows climbing. A mood? For what? I'm making... Bring the jar, I said. We can all admire your bechamel later. 5 minutes after I'd left the office, I was back with Fritz in tow, both nutmeg jars and a sense that the planet had tilted a couple of degrees off axis. Wolfe took the first jar in his hand, the one Fritz had used. He unscrewed the metal lid, bent his head, and took a long, unhurried sniff. Then he capped it again, set it down, and repeated the process with the second jar. Fritz stood in front of the desk, his round, usually placid face pinched. "Mr. Wolfe," he said, "what is wrong? That man," Wolfe said, "is a colleague of yours, so-called, whose composure has suffered an eclipse. He claims there is something amiss with my nutmeg." "There is nothing," Fritz began, then stopped. "You do not think so?" Wolfe's mouth twisted. "I think that if there is, I've been eating it for some time. That is disagreeable, but proof is not acquired by anxiety." He held the 2 jars out a little toward Marco. "You, sir? Which is which?" Marco rose, took each jar, and sniffed. His hands didn't shake. "Say what you like about chefs. They're steady where it counts. This," he said after a moment, holding up the first jar, "smelled in the kitchen earlier. And this," he indicated the second, "is like the one we use at La Fiamma now." "Fritz?" Wolfe said. Fritz sniffed both, his face scrunching in concentration. "The first is a little different, perhaps. Not bad. The second, yes, that is like what I had before we finished it last week. I thought the new jar was just," he gestured, "a little stronger." "You thought nothing of it," Wolfe said tartly. "You who once sent back 20 pounds of morals because they lacked spirit." "Phooey." He tapped the first jar with his finger. "This, then, is the suspect. I will not taste it. It would be imprudent. Nor will you, Fritz. You will discard it with due ceremony. Mr. Goodwin will see to getting another supply from the importer and will verify that no unusual persons have had access to it in transit or storage." "Sure," I said. "I'll ask the nutmeg man if he's seen any sinister strangers loitering around the spice sacks." "Do not be a jackass," Wolfe said without heat. "Record names, dates, and routes. Someone adulterated this, if Mr. Liozzi is not delusional. That required proximity, access, a hand, find whose." "I will dispose of it at once," Fritz said, taking the jar as if it had insulted his mother. "And scour the shelf, and check the others. It is—" He swallowed. "It is offensive." He went out, carrying the jar at arm's length. I closed the door behind him. "Well," I said, "score 1 for the frightened man." Marco's shoulders sagged with something like relief. "You see," he said to Wolfe. "You see, it is not only in my head." "I see," Wolfe said slowly, "that the contents of one jar differ in smell from another. That is all. Whether that difference represents enough poison to fell a mouse, much less a man, I do not know, nor do you. But, Wolfe overrode him, your conclusion that tonight's stew at La Fiamma is intended as a vehicle for murder remains conjecture. Vivid conjecture, but conjecture." Marco's eyes hardened. "You will not help me." Wolfe steepled his fingers across his middle, the familiar roof. "On the contrary, I may. The tampering in my kitchen makes this my affair. I do not relish being used as a testing ground for anything, least of all homicide. However," he stuck out his lower lip, an expression that in him is less childish and more like a judge contemplating a defendant's tie, "I do not work on panic, I work on facts. Mr. Goodwin." "Present," I said. "You will accompany Mr. Liozzi back to his restaurant," Wolfe said. "You will survey his kitchen. You will ascertain who has access to what and when. You will observe his staff and ask such questions as you deem appropriate. You will also obtain a list of the persons expected at tonight's dinner, including the intermediary who made the reservation and supplied the recipe." Marco spread his hands. "But I already told you, they did not give their—" "You told me," Wolfe said, "that they did not give their names to you. Someone knows who they are. The telephone does not dial itself. The reservation was not made by ectoplasm. Archie will find the person and identify the party. You will facilitate this with ungrudging cooperation. You will refrain from dramatics in the kitchen. You will tell no one that I have taken an interest." Marco hesitated. "And if I find nothing?" I asked. "If it's just a jar that had a rough childhood?" "Then," Wolfe said, "we will have established that someone interfered with my spice shelf for no lethal purpose, which is imbecile but possible, and Mr. Leozzi will be free to serve his stew in good conscience. If, on the other hand, you find anything suggestive, I will decide whether to intervene. I will not be hustled into action by your nerves, sir." Marco's face flushed, but he nodded. "You will come tonight? To watch?" "Certainly not," Wolfe said. "I do not eat in public rooms, and I will not start now to gratify your anxieties. My contribution will be cerebral, not ambulatory." He shifted in his chair. "There is also the matter of my fee." Marco opened his mouth, then shut it again. Of course, I did not come with—" "You came," Wolfe said, "with a tale of an insidious, cunning plot and an implied threat to my own person. I will regard your retainer as a token of good faith, not as a measure of the value of my skin. $2,000 in advance." Marco blinked. That is reasonable," Wolfe said. "If the sum is beyond you, there are policemen in this city whose salaries are paid by your taxes. You may unburden yourself to them and accept the consequences." I watched Marco's face. He looked like a man doing math in his head and not enjoying the subject. Finally, he let out a breath, sagged a little, and nodded. "I have it," he said. "Not here, but I can get it. Today, before the dinner. Will that—" "It will suffice," Wolfe said. "Archie will accompany you and ensure its safe passage to my desk." "Sure," I said. "I'll hold his hand if the bank teller looks menacing." Marco managed a small, crooked smile. "You think I am foolish," he said to me. "I think," I said, "that if you're right, staying scared may be the healthiest thing you've done. Come on, let's go see your temple of gastronomy." He rose. At the door, he paused and looked back at Wolfe. "Thank you, Mr. Wolfe," he said quietly, "for taking me seriously enough to test the spice. Most men would not." "Most men," Wolfe said, "do not have their nutmeg tampered with." After the door closed, I turned back to the desk. Wolfe's eyes were already drifting toward the stack of books waiting for him, but they hadn't landed yet. "You don't really think," I said, "that someone is using our pantry as a firing range?" "No," Wolfe said. "I think it unlikely. But someone has intruded in my kitchen, and that I will not endure. Whether the purpose is lethal, malicious, or merely asinine, we shall see." He closed his eyes and settled deeper into the chair, which is like a battleship adjusting its draft. "Go," he said. "Do your prying. Be thorough. Be wary. Report by 6 o'clock, so I may decide whether I shall permit Fritz to serve lunch tomorrow without my supervision." "Sure," I said. "I'll bring you the world on a platter. Hold the nutmeg." As I went out, I took one last look at him. He seemed, as usual, a monument carved into the leather and air of that office, immovable, imperturbable. Only the slight tightening at the corners of his mouth, the almost invisible line between his brows, betrayed anything else. If you'd asked me then, I would have said this was a disturbance, sure, but a minor one. A professional panic about imaginary poison, a jar of off-brand nutmeg, and a nervous chef. I'd go down to La Fiamma, check the pots, flirt with the hostesses, and be back in time for beer. I have been wrong before, but rarely, I admit, with as much enthusiasm as I was about to be. I didn't bother trying to get more out of Wolfe before leaving. When he says go, you go, because staying only gives him another opportunity to add chores. I grabbed my coat from the rack, made sure my notebook had enough blank pages to record a restaurant-sized quantity of nervous energy, and found Marco waiting at the bottom of the stoop like a man expecting a sniper in the lilac bushes. The cab ride to La Fiamma was a quiet one, except for Marco's fingers drumming a beat meant for a faster heart rate. I let him have his silence. Sometimes a client needs to get used to the idea that he has traded the comfort of panic for the more complicated discomfort of professional assistance. He stared straight ahead until we were near Midtown, where the traffic got thicker and the smell of steam rising from grates started announcing itself like a street vendor. As we walked the last block, he finally spoke. "You will not treat them as suspects," he said. "My staff. They are loyal, hard-working." "I never treat anyone as a suspect until they earn the badge," I said. "And even then, I don't engrave it." He swallowed that with no visible satisfaction. La Fiamma came into view, wide windows, brass fixtures polished enough to blind anyone catching the wrong angle, and a steady hum behind the glass, like the restaurant had swallowed a hive of bees. It was early afternoon, the lull between lunch and dinner prep. But a place like this never really sleeps. It dozes with one eye open. Inside, the maitre d', a thin man with a perfectly calibrated expression of cultivated superiority, greeted Marco with a hint of relief. "You've returned." "Yes," Marco said shortly, brushing past him. "This is Mr. Goodwin. He is consulting." The maitre d' gave me a once-over that confirmed he had no idea what category a man like me fit into, and he didn't approve of categories he couldn't label. "The kitchen," Marco said, and I followed him through swinging doors into the heart of the operation. You can tell a lot about a kitchen at first glance. This one was clean, organized, and humming, but there was something else too. The air felt tense, not tragic tense or mutinous tense, but tight, like everyone was holding their breath waiting for something to happen. A couple sous chefs glanced over with the kind of curiosity you give a stranger who walks into your living room unannounced. Marco made quick introductions, names, titles, skill sets, and each shook my hand with that wary compliance workers reserved for someone who might be a health inspector or, worse, a prospective new manager. No one looked guilty. No one looked innocent either. Kitchens breed a certain uniform stoicism that makes everyone look like they have something to hide, usually a burn. "This is where it happened," Marco said, taking me to a heavy steel counter beside the stove. "The first tampering. Who was here?" "My sous chef, Rafa. Luca was at the prep station. Marta was in the walk-in. I was in the office signing a delivery slip." "And behind you," I said, glancing at the hallway door leading to the back alley. "The entrance stays unlocked during working hours." Marco grimaced. "The building has delivery traffic. The lock sometimes sticks." "That's the kind of detail murderers and thieves love," I said. "Do you have a list of suppliers with access?" "I can get it." "Do." The sous chef, Rafa, joined us. Lean, sharp-eyed, nervous. He met my gaze with the kind of earnestness that feels practiced. "Chef told you," he said, "about the second batch?" "Yes," I said. "Tell me from your angle." "I tasted it. Something was wrong. I've worked with Chef 5 years. I know how he seasons. It wasn't him." He hesitated. "And the pot. Someone had stirred it. I could tell from the surface." "You notice details," I said. "He trains us that way." I walked the room with my eyes first, then with my feet. The spice rack, the stock pot, the cooler, the prep station, the little corners where someone with a purpose could act unnoticed. The exit to the alley was too convenient. Half the crimes in New York could be solved by cementing those doors shut. "Who has the recipe?" I asked. Marco's jaw tightened. "The intermediary. People like this. They don't speak to chefs. They send someone to do the speaking." "And this someone's name?" "I don't know." The voice on the phone was young, polite, in the way of someone who's used to giving instructions that won't be questioned. He gave the menu, the recipe, the time. He said the party would arrive under an agreed name. Sextus. Like the Roman numeral. "All right," I said. "Show me where the recipe is." He led me to the small office tucked between dry storage and an electrical panel. It was cramped but functional. On the desk was a clipboard with papers clipped neatly in place. He handed it to me. The recipe wasn't typed. It was handwritten. Clean block letters. No flourishes. No personality. The kind of script you get in architectural drafts or military memos. Precise. Practical. Anonymous. Who delivered this? It was slipped under the door last week. I raised a brow. Slipped under the door is not standard procedure in the culinary world. That is why I kept it secret, he said. I did not want to alarm my staff. You might want to consider alarming them, I said. It builds character. I read the ingredients carefully. Nothing exotic, nothing inherently lethal. But someone could have duplicated this recipe elsewhere, comparing outcomes, testing doses, seeing which method worked best. I didn't like that thought. It had too much logic in it. Anyone new hired recently? I asked. No. Anyone quit suddenly? No. Anyone act strange since this started? That question landed differently. Marco hesitated. Not strange, just tense. They sense something is wrong. I flipped the recipe page over. Blank. No watermark, no printer marks, no fingerprint smudges. Too clean. We stepped out of the office. The kitchen buzzed, steel on steel, the soft whoosh of burners, the clatter of pans. A normal kitchen, except I had the distinct sense of walking through a room that had already been compromised. Then something caught my eye. On the corner of the spice rack, high shelf, eye level, there was a jar slightly out of place. Nothing dramatic, just a quarter-inch forward compared to its neighbors. People don't usually disturb only one spice. Chefs move in trios, salt, pepper, herb. But this stood alone. I reached up and pulled it down. Cinnamon, full, unopened. I turned it slowly. Along the bottom edge of the glass, faint but visible, was a smudged fingerprint. Not a fresh one, but not that old either. Marco leaned in. That hasn't been used today. Or yesterday, I asked. Not as far as I know. I held it up to the light. Something about the mark bothered me. Not the print itself, but its placement. Low, near the bottom, as if someone held the jar while reaching up. Someone short, or someone reaching behind something else. Not grabbing the jar, steadying themselves, which meant someone had climbed here, or leaned here. Recently, I looked at Marco. Who stands on this counter? No one. It's forbidden. Then someone who doesn't care about rules has been doing a little acrobatics. I set the jar down, and I want to know what they were trying to reach. Before he could answer, a voice called from the dining room. Chef, there's someone asking for you. Marco's face drained a shade. Now? Who? The server stepped in. A man. Says he's here on behalf of the party tonight. He wants to check something. Marco stared at me. I stared back. Well, I said, that's our next breadcrumb. Marco didn't move at first. His eyes fixed on the server like the man had just announced the health inspector found a body in the freezer. I gave him a nudge with my elbow, subtle enough not to alarm the staff, but firm enough to remind him that when trouble knocks, you don't hide under the tablecloth. Let's go meet your guest, I said, and if he starts reaching for a spice jar, I'll pull the fire alarm. Marco swallowed and led the way out of the kitchen. The dining room was quieter now, between shifts. White tablecloths stretched across empty tables like they were waiting for the evening's cast of characters to arrive. At the far end, near a corner booth, stood a man who didn't look like he belonged to any category the restaurant normally hosted. He wasn't dressed badly. Gray suit, clean shoes, tie knotted with more care than personality, but he didn't give off the usual hum of wealth or culinary enthusiasm. He gave off neutrality, manufactured, polished neutrality. He turned as we approached. His face was smooth, unlined, and expressionless enough to make a mannequin look emotionally volatile. His eyes weren't flat. They just weren't interested. "Chef Liozzi," he said. His voice was calm, the tone of someone who didn't worry about being overheard because he didn't plan to say anything important. "I'm here on behalf of tonight's private party." Marco managed a nod. "Yes, you said you needed something." The man slid his gaze to me. And you are?" "Goodwin," I said. "Quality assurance." It wasn't untrue. It also wasn't enlightening, which was part of the charm. He looked back to Marco. "The hosts want to confirm that the final course will be prepared according to the provided instructions. No deviations." Marco's spine stiffened. "The stew is being prepared exactly as instructed." "And the ingredients?" the man asked. "Sourced as required." "Of course," Marco said. "I run a professional kitchen." The man inclined his head slightly, as if acknowledging a statement that hadn't impressed him. "Good. The guests are particular about authenticity." Authenticity. There was a word that could mean anything from "don't skimp on the wine" to "we need deniability." I stepped a bit closer. "You've been very helpful. Before you head out, mind telling us your name, in case the chef needs to reach you regarding the party." His eyes flicked to mine, then away. "Unnecessary. If there is a problem, we will contact you." "That's the trouble with anonymity," I said lightly. "It's hard to get good customer service from it." If he had a reaction, it was buried under several layers of professional unflappability. But his gaze lingered on me for a half-second longer than it needed to. Then he said, "We expect the evening to proceed without complications," and turned to leave. We watched him go, the door swinging shut behind him with an indifferent sigh. "That," I said, "is a man who practices smiling in the mirror and never actually uses it." Marco rubbed his palms against his apron, which was a neat trick considering he wasn't wearing one. "He has never come here before. For any reservation." "Why today?" "Maybe he heard rumors the stew is haunted," I said. "Or maybe he wanted to check if their plan," I kept my voice low, "is still on track." Marco flinched. "So you believe there is a plan?" "I believe," I said, "that people who go to this much trouble for secrecy usually aren't arranging a birthday party." A busboy drifted past with silverware, eyeing us. I waited until he was safely out of earshot before continuing. "Tell me something, Marco. Has anyone else been in or around the restaurant this week who normally wouldn't be?" He took a moment, thinking, not searching for an answer, building the courage to give it. "There was one thing," he said quietly. "A delivery." "Food?" "No. A wine shipment. A single crate. Not from our usual distributor. The label said it was for the private party. I did not order it." "Where is it now?" "In the cellar." "That's where we're going," I said. He led me through a short hallway at the back, past the employee lockers and a stack of linen bags waiting for pickup. The door to the cellar creaked, which seemed appropriate for a place that smelled faintly of dust, cork, and ambition. The lights flicked on overhead, dim but enough to see the rows of bottles lined in neat ranks like a small, expensive army. Marco pointed. "It's there." The crate sat by itself near a support beam. New wood, no dust, no scuff marks along the floor to indicate dragging. Someone had carried it, not slid it. I crouched and examined the label. The handwriting matched the recipe. Same neat block letters. Same sense of somebody who lived a life without curves. "This delivered by the same courier who usually handles your wine?" I asked. "No," Marco said. "He was unfamiliar." "You signed for it?" "Yes." I pressed my fingers under the lid and lifted. Someone had opened it before, but resealed it neatly. Inside were 6 bottles of Barolo. No pesticides taped under the corks, no rattlesnakes waiting to leap out. Just wine. But the same problem sat there as with the nutmeg jar. Nothing obvious didn't mean nothing real. I pulled one bottle out. Heavy. Cool. I tilted it, watching the meniscus glide. I don't suppose your mysterious intermediary mentioned this shipment. He said nothing. We replaced the bottle and closed the lid. What time does tonight's party start? I asked. 10. And between now and then, how many people go in and out of this cellar? My sommelier, myself, occasionally a server. Right, then here's our plan. You lock this cellar. What? Lock it, and give the key only to someone you trust, preferably someone who doesn't faint under pressure. I cannot lock the sommelier. He can knock. Marco stared at me. You believe something will happen with the wine? I believe, I said, that this party has been engineered with more secrecy than a smuggling operation, that someone tampered with your stew base twice, and that the same architect of the recipe dropped off a personal selection of Barolo like a calling card. I dusted off my hands. Someone is staging something, Marco, and we're not waiting for curtain time to find out what. Before he could answer, the kitchen door upstairs slammed, loud, urgent. Heavy footsteps pounded down the hall. A voice shouted, "Chef, you need to come, now!" Marco's face drained again, not from fear this time, but from the confirmation of it. We ran up the stairs. Because something had just happened. And whatever it wasn't about to make the evening's menu any simpler. The shouting had come from the kitchen, which is the kind of place you don't want shouting. Kitchens are meant for controlled chaos, not vocalized panic. Marco pushed through the swinging doors with the kind of dread you get when you're about to learn whether the bomb is real or just the clock ticking. The staff had gathered near the prep counter, not tightly, more like a ripple of bodies giving something in the center a respectful, nervous birth. As I moved closer, I saw what the commotion was about. A pot, large, stainless steel, heavy enough that you don't move it unless you mean it, sat overturned on the floor. Its contents, a thick, dark reddish base that had been simmering for tonight's first courses, had splattered across the tiles like someone had thrown a bucket of paint during a tantrum. The stew base had spread outward in a slick, ugly fan. And standing beside it, white as the tiles beneath the mess, was the young sous chef, Rafa. "I didn't touch it," he kept saying. "I swear, chef, I didn't touch it." Marco went to him, one hand raised to quiet the room. "Tell me exactly what happened." Rafa swallowed. I stepped away for just a second, to check on the reduction. When I turned back, the pot..." He gestured helplessly. "It fell." "Fell," I repeated, crouching near the mess, but not close enough to ruin my shoes. A pot that size doesn't fall unless someone helps it decide. "It slid," Rafa insisted. "I heard the sound, like metal scraping, and then it tipped." I looked at the stove. It was clean. Too clean. The area where the pot had been wasn't just empty. It had been wiped. A swipe of cloth, quick and careless, smearing the remnants of whatever had been spilled before the pot went over. "He didn't wipe that," I said quietly to Marco. "He couldn't have. He's been panicking at full volume since you walked in." Marco nodded tightly. "Something is wrong. Again." "Wrong and recent," I said. "Which means someone was here in the last 60 seconds. The kitchen staff murmured, shifting uneasily. Kitchens breed gossip, but this was different. This was fear with a garnish of suspicion. I stood and scanned the room. There are only so many ways out of a kitchen. The main door to the dining room, too visible. The cellar stairs, too loud. The back hallway, possible. And then there was the delivery exit. I pushed through the narrow hall to the alley door. It was shut, but the latch hadn't caught. I pressed it with 2 fingers. It swung open with no resistance. "Marco?" I called. He hurried over, wiping his hands on his coat out of habit. I pointed. "When did you last check this?" "Before you arrived," he said. I made sure it was closed. "It wasn't closed when someone left," I said. "Or entered." A busboy who'd wandered too close shrank back under my stare. "Anyone see movement back here?" Asked. He shook his head violently. "No, sir. Just trash pickup earlier." Earlier wasn't helpful. We needed seconds. I stepped into the alley. It was narrow, wedged between the restaurant and the dry cleaner next door. The ground was damp, afternoon condensation from the freezer vents, and near the door, in the patch where the pavement met a warmer draft, there was a partial footprint, heel only. Small, not child small, but small enough to belong to someone light on their feet. A woman, maybe. Or a man with delicate footwear and not much body weight. It was too smeared for brand markings, but the outline was clear. Someone had braced themselves here, pivoted, and left in a hurry. "Marco," I said, re-entering the kitchen, "you're not dealing with a ghost. Someone's moving through your restaurant like it's their summer home." He rubbed his forehead. "Why? What do they want?" I glanced around at the staff, all of them looking like suspects, except for the fact that most people don't fake bafflement this convincingly. "They want access," I said, "to the food, to the preparation, and probably to you, and they're counting on confusion to hide what they've done." The maitre d', who had drifted in and now hovered near the doorway like an expensive shadow, cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should call the police." Marco stiffened. "No, not unless Mr. Goodwin advises it." Everyone turned to me like I was headlining the evening's entertainment. "Calling the police," I said. "Gets you sirens, statements, and half your reservations cancelled. It also scares off whoever is doing this, which sounds good, except it also scares off your clues." Marco nodded quickly. "No police." The maitre d' looked relieved and offended at the same time. I studied the overturned pot again. If someone wanted to contaminate it, spilling it was counterproductive. Unless the contamination had already happened and was now destroyed, eliminating evidence. Or unless the goal wasn't the pot at all, but the chaos its fall would create. Chaos creates distraction. Distraction creates opportunities, and opportunities create access. I tapped Marco's arm. "Where were you exactly when this happened?" "In the cellar," he said. "With you." Meaning whoever wanted to make their move waited until both of us were downstairs. I nodded. "Smart. That means they were watching." The staff exchanged glances. Quick, nervous, sideways. I turned a slow circle, reading faces like lines in a ledger. No guilt jumped out. No eye avoided mine long enough to indict itself. If someone here was the culprit, they were either a world-class liar, or they weren't here anymore. "Listen," I said, raising my voice enough to reach the edges of the room. "Someone has been messing with your kitchen. They've tampered with ingredients, slipped in unobserved, and now they're knocking things over like an obnoxious poltergeist. This isn't random. It's deliberate, and it's tied to tonight's private dinner." That froze the room like a blast of liquid nitrogen. Even the pans seemed to stop simmering. Rafa whispered, "The party with the stew?" "The same," I confirmed. "And unless we want this to escalate, we need to tighten things up fast." Marco blinked. "Escalate? To what?" "To whatever they've been practicing for," I said. The room stayed quiet. Too quiet. Then a server poked his head in again, his expression even tighter than before. "Chef," he said, voice brittle. "There's a problem at table 7. "We're closed," Marco snapped. "There shouldn't be anyone. They insist," the server said, "and they said they were told to come early. By the man you met a few minutes ago." Marco and I exchanged a look. Not a long one, just long enough to agree silently that we were both sick of being one move behind. "Archie," Marco whispered, "what do we do?" "We go," I said. "One step at a time. And this time, we don't let anyone leave before we know what table they're really sitting at." And with that, we headed for table 7. Because if there was a next breadcrumb, it had just seated itself and asked for service. The dining room was still mostly empty, which made the presence of whoever had claimed table 7 stand out like a single lit window in a dark building. Marco walked a half step ahead of me, and I could feel the tension rising off him like steam off a stock pot. He was trying to look composed for his staff and failing with admirable consistency. Table 7 was near the back, half shielded by a decorative column that someone had once thought would add charm, but now mostly added blind spots. As we approached, I got a look at our early bird. He wasn't the same man who'd visited earlier. This one was younger by maybe 10 years, slimmer and trying harder not to attract attention. His suit was dark and plain, the kind of suit you wear when you don't want to be the best-dressed person in the room. His hair was slicked back with enough product to withstand light rainfall, and he was pretending to study the wine list with the focus of a man who didn't drink wine and didn't plan to start today. He looked up as we reached the table. His eyes darted from me to Marco, registering both recognition and hesitation. Recognition of Marco, hesitation about me. "You're early," Marco said, tighter than a drawn wire. The man offered a non-committal smile. "We were told to arrive ahead of time to ensure privacy." "By whom?" I asked, pulling out the chair opposite him without being invited. If there's one thing I've learned from Wolfe, it's that taking a seat is a strategic maneuver, not a courtesy. The man blinked. "The same person who arranged the details. I assumed you were informed." "Assume less," I advised. "It'll add years to your life." Marco remained standing, arms crossed. "What is the purpose of your visit?" "The dinner is not until 10. The man shifted. "It's a matter of preparation." That word again. Preparation. Everyone connected to this event seemed surgically allergic to plain language. I leaned forward. "What exactly are you preparing? Because from where I'm sitting, you've shown up early, unannounced, and unnamed. That tends to make people twitchy." His fingers tightened on the edge of the menu. "I'm here to verify the conditions." "Conditions," I repeated. "What conditions?" He glanced around, checking for listening ears. The room was empty except for a busboy polishing glasses with the intensity of someone who had no intention of overhearing anything. The man lowered his voice. "The flavors." Marco tensed like he'd been jabbed with a thermometer. "The flavors of what?" "The final course." I gave him a steady look. "The venison stew." He nodded once. "And how?" I asked. "Do you intend to verify the flavors when the dish won't be started until tonight?" The man hesitated, long enough to make it clear he hadn't worked out an answer in advance. "We were told," he said slowly, "that the chef has already begun the preparation." Marco's brows lifted. "The base, yes, but which was just spilled," I finished. "Conveniently, unless you count sabotage as a form of culinary artistry." The man's gaze sharpened, not with fear, with calculation. "Spilled?" "Oh, yes," I said. "Someone's been very busy in the kitchen. Spices out of place, doors left ajar, footprints where no footprints belong, and a pot that toppled itself like it had philosophical objections to gravity." Marco shot me a glance that said I was giving away too much, but I ignored him. Sometimes people tell the truth only when they realize you already know part of it. The man wet his lips. "We didn't authorize that." I raised an eyebrow. "Then who did?" His jaw tightened. "Look, the party tonight, there are expectations, high expectations, and great discretion. If anything goes wrong, anything, there will be consequences." "For whom?" I asked. "For everyone involved." That was the most honest thing he'd said so far. Marco stepped forward. "You need to tell us who you represent, what this dinner is actually for." The man's eyes flicked toward the exit. "I can't." "You can't, or you won't?" I asked. His silence made the answer obvious. He stood abruptly. "I need to make a call." "No," I said, rising just as quickly. "You need to sit down." He paused. Not because I'd scared him, I hadn't, but because he'd realized leaving the table would be a bigger problem than staying at it. Marco moved to block his escape route, more decisively than I expected. The chef might not have experience with criminals, but he had the reflexes of a man who'd spent years guarding expensive kitchen equipment. The man sat again, jaw clenched. "Look," he said quietly, "I'm not your enemy. I'm here to ensure tonight goes smoothly." "And smooth," I said, "usually means predictable. So let's predict something together. Someone doesn't want this meal to happen, or they want it to happen in a very specific way. Either way, they've made more appearances in your kitchen today than your own chef." His expression flickered. "Got him." "You don't know," I said. "You really don't know who's orchestrating this. You're just the messenger." He didn't confirm it, but he didn't deny it either. Marco exhaled shakily. "This is madness. We should cancel the dinner." "You could," I said. "But then whoever planned this goes somewhere else, does something else, and next time you won't see it coming." The messenger lowered his voice another notch. "If you cancel, they'll blame all of us." "Then help us," I said. "Who hired you? Who contacted you?" He swallowed. "I don't know their names. I get instructions, payments, that's all." "How?" I asked. "Email, phone?" "Phone," he said reluctantly. "Always a blocked number." "And the recipe?" I asked. His face tightened. "Delivered? Like you said. You didn't slip it under the door?" "No," which meant our ghost had been busy long before today. I was about to push further when a frantic voice cut through the dining room from the back hallway. "Archie," it was Rafa, "you need to see this, now." The messenger flinched. Marco flinched harder, and I felt the very specific kind of dread that comes when you realize the next shoe is not just dropping, it's landing on your head. "Stay here," I told the messenger. Then Marco and I ran toward the kitchen again, because whatever Rafa had found, it wasn't going to be spilled stew this time. And the person behind all this, they'd just made their next move. Rafa was pale enough to qualify as a garnish for cold appetizers, and he kept pointing toward the walk-in refrigerator like whatever he'd seen in there might still be alive and considering a second appearance. Marco reached him first. "What is it? Speak." Rafa swallowed, gathered a shred of composure, and pushed open the heavy door. "There. Look." We stepped inside. The blast of cold air hit like a physical shove, but even that didn't distract from the sight on the middle shelf. A stainless steel tray neatly lined with what should have been tonight's venison, except the top cuts had been removed and placed to one side with meticulous precision. Along the exposed layer of meat, in strokes so deliberate they looked etched, someone had written a message. Not with ink, with spice, cinnamon, or something cinnamon-colored. In block letters, straight and sharp. "Check the wine. It's not every day someone uses your main protein as a memo pad." Marco let out a strangled breath and put a hand to the rack as if he needed help staying upright. "Who wrote that?" he whispered. "That," I said, "is the question of the day, possibly the year." I studied the letters. Whoever had done this wasn't improvising. The strokes were even, controlled, the same precision as the handwritten recipe, same temperament, same aesthetics, a person who didn't rush, even when trespassing and vandalizing dinner. Rafa spoke softly behind us. "Chef, I swear, I checked the walk-in 10 minutes before. Nothing was touched. I was prepping the mirepoix." "Quiet," Marco said gently but firmly. He wasn't angry. He was terrified. And fear makes a man choose his words like he's balancing them on a knife. I crouched to get a closer look. The spice wasn't simple cinnamon, not exactly. It was finer, almost powder-like. It clung differently. And the scent was wrong, too sharp. Underneath the warmth was a faint sting, metallic enough to get my attention. "We're going to test this," I said. "But not here. I'll take a sample with me when I return to Wolfe." Marco blinked. "Tonight?" "You're taking it to him tonight." "Not the whole tray," I said. He'd faint. Just a pinch. He nodded shakily. "Archie," he whispered, "this can't be coincidence." "It isn't," I said. "Nothing about this is coincidence. Someone is choreographing this like a dance routine." He turned to Rafa. "Who else has been near the walk-in?" "No one," the sous chef said, voice rising. "Only the server who came for the panna cotta." "Which server?" I cut in. "Daniel." I didn't know Daniel personally, but in a place like this, a server is either the most invisible or the most observant person in the building. It depends on what they're choosing to be. "Find him," I told Marco. "Quietly. Don't yell. Just ask someone where he went." Marco hurried out, and I stayed in the walk-in long enough to take a tiny portion of the spice message, sealed tight in a folded piece of wax paper I found on the top shelf. Then I followed Marco back to the kitchen. He hadn't gotten far. A hostess was talking to him in urgent whispers. "He left," she said. "Daniel, just now. He said he wasn't feeling well." "Which direction?" I asked. "Back exit," she replied. Of course. The alley again. Whoever this was, they liked predictable patterns. "We're going after him," I told Marco. "But no arguments. He's the only staff member unaccounted for during the last 20 minutes. And even if he's innocent, someone told him to disappear." Marco hesitated, then grabbed his coat from a hook near the prep station. Not the smartest choice in an investigation, but smart enough when you don't plan on letting fear make the decisions. We moved fast through the back hall and out into the alley. The cold air was sharper now, and the narrow passage echoed with the same damp hum of the freezer vents. No one was in sight, but halfway down the alley, near the dumpster, something glinted, a small, rectangular shape, half hidden in shadow. I jogged over, a cell phone, face down. I picked it up. The screen was cracked. The case bore the faint indentations of a cheap brand, and the background image, if it could be called that, was a blurry picture of a dog wearing a Christmas sweater. Daniel, unless proven otherwise, had terrible taste in wallpaper. Marco reached me. "Is it his?" "Likely," I said. "The question is why he dropped it." A noise echoed from the street beyond the alley. A car door shutting, then another. Not hurried, not panicked, just timed. Marco's breath caught. "Someone took him." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe he saw something he shouldn't have and ran." I pocketed the phone. Either way, he's not here. Whoever is moving through this restaurant isn't afraid of leaving messages, but they're very good at staying one step ahead. Marco leaned against the wall. "What do we do?" "We adjust," I said. "We don't chase shadows. We chase what the shadows care about." He swallowed. "The wine?" "Exactly." We went back inside, through the delivery door. The kitchen was quieter now, the staff holding a kind of collective breath that only kitchens and churches ever master. Someone was waiting. The messenger, the one from table 7. He stood in the doorway between dining room and kitchen, pale as an olive oil-less risotto, his hands clenched at his sides. "I need to speak to you," he said urgently. "Perfect timing," I replied, "because I have a few questions of my own." His eyes darted once around the room, then locked onto mine. "They changed the plan," he said quietly. "The people behind tonight, they changed something." "What something?" "The final course isn't the target anymore." Every sound in the kitchen stopped. Marco whispered, "What do you mean?" The messenger swallowed hard. "They told me just now, the real target isn't the stew." He hesitated, and when he spoke again, his voice was a thread. "It's someone who will be eating it." And just like that, the entire shape of the evening changed. Not sabotage, not practice, a hunt. The messenger's words sat in the air like smoke. Thin, colorless, and toxic enough that everyone who heard them forgot how to breathe for a full 3 seconds. Then Marco found his voice, though it wasn't much more than a cracked whisper. "A target? Someone specific? The messenger nodded once. Yes. And you just learned this? I asked. He ran a hand through his slicked hair, destroying the careful part he'd probably spent 10 minutes perfecting that morning. Just now, they called me while you were in the back. I stepped outside. They said the focus of the evening has changed. They want confirmation. Of what? I prompted. Of the seating, plan, the chef's rotation, and whether the wine will be served as instructed. And is the target one of the guests at tonight's dinner? I asked. His silence was confirmation enough. Marco backed into a prep table, stopping only when his hip hit the corner hard enough to make him wince. My God, he whispered. One of them. They're planning to kill one of their own. Or someone close enough to the group that they expected him to accept an invitation, I thought. But I kept that observation to myself. I gestured for the messenger to move into the kitchen, away from staff ears. Start talking, everything you know. I told you, he insisted. I don't know their names. They don't tell me anything beyond instructions. They just said the plan was altered, and that I should notify you immediately if there were complications. Like the overturned pot? I asked. His eyes flicked downward. That, yes, and the message you received just now. Check the wine. Marco stiffened. You knew about that? They knew, the messenger corrected. They told me. They said someone else was interfering. Someone not connected to their group. Someone inside the restaurant. Well, I said, planting my hands on my hips. That narrows it down to a staff roster of 15 and a paranoid chef. Marco's jaw tightened. You think someone here is working with them? I think someone here is working with someone, I said. And at this point, I'm less concerned about affiliations and more concerned about methods. So tell me, what were you supposed to verify about the wine? The messenger hesitated. Not long. Just long enough that I could tell he was deciding whether cooperation was worth more than self-preservation. They told me that a specific bottle must be served to the target, he said at last, and that the target must drink it. Marco let out a strangled sound. You can't force a guest to drink wine. They won't have to, the man said. Apparently, this person always accepts the wine. It's a ritual, part of their habit. Switched bottle? I asked. Not switched, he said. Designated. One bottle in that crate is marked in a way only they understand. I felt the pieces shift, slowly, like gears testing their alignment. And you don't know which bottle? I asked. No. But they do, he nodded. They said it would be obvious when the time comes. It wasn't much, but it was enough to sketch the edges of the danger. Someone high on the food chain, someone predictable enough in habit to be killed by their own preferences, and someone important enough that a private dinner was the chosen venue for the hit. Marco sagged into the nearest chair. I cannot run a service under these conditions. This is insane. No argument, I said. But we're not canceling anything yet. He lifted his head. Why not? Because if we cancel, the target leaves the building alive. But the people trying to kill them don't vanish. They regroup. The next time, they won't use your kitchen. They'll use a street corner. The messenger swallowed. They'll blame me if this doesn't go according to plan. They'll blame you anyway, I said, and possibly kill you for good measure. He inhaled sharply. So what am I supposed to do? You're going to sit at table 7, I said. You're not leaving the dining room again unless it's with an escort. You don't take calls, you don't make calls, and you don't acknowledge anyone who walks through that door unless it's me or Marco. Marco blinked at me. Archie, Nos, what are we doing? We're buying time, I said. Because I need to get this sample, I tapped the folded wax paper in my pocket. To Wolfe. Immediately. His eyes widened. You're leaving? Yes. Because Wolfe needs to see this before the dinner starts, and he needs to know everything. We're dealing with someone who has chemistry knowledge, precise handwriting, and enough access to stroll through your kitchen like it's Central Park. The messenger swallowed hard. "What happens when you leave?" "You keep your staff in the front half of the restaurant," I said to Marco. "No one goes to the walk-in alone. No one uses the back exit. And you lock that wine cellar now. I don't care if someone needs to get a bottle for a customer. They can wait." Marco nodded faintly. "And the guests tonight?" "We'll deal with that when I'm back," I said. "If things go smoothly, Wolfe will have a plan. If things go poorly, Wolfe will still have a plan. His range of planning just varies in how much shouting it requires." The messenger whispered, "What about the target? Should I warn them?" "No," I said. "You'll scare them off, and then we lose them. And right now, keeping them here is the only way to keep them alive long enough for Wolfe to figure out who wants them dead." Marco straightened. "All right, we'll hold the line." "You'll do better than that," I said, moving toward the coat rack. "You'll keep everyone alive." I paused, halfway to the exit. "And Marco, one more thing." He looked up at me. "Under no circumstances does anyone touch that wine crate until I get back." He nodded once. I turned to the messenger. "Don't disappear. You're not fast enough to outrun me, and I've had exercise today." He slumped into the chair. Marco took a breath that was almost steady, and I stepped out the door into the cold afternoon air, heading for Wolfe's brownstone with a pocket full of powder and the sinking feeling that the next time I walked into La Fiamma, someone at that dinner table was going to be sitting in the wrong seat, or lying under it. By the time I reached a cab on Lexington, I had 3 competing instincts: to run, to look over my shoulder every 6 seconds, and to call Wolfe and tell him to cancel his afternoon schedule and possibly his week. I did none of them. Running attracts attention, looking over your shoulder convinces people you're worth following, and calling Wolfe when you haven't yet delivered the facts is an invitation to be instructed in the finer points of incompetence. So I sat back in the cab, kept one hand on the folded wax paper in my pocket, and let the city carry me uptown. Twice I thought I saw someone shadowing the cab in traffic. First a dark sedan, then a delivery van, but both dissolved into Manhattan noise when the lights changed. Still, the sense of pursuit clung like a damp coat. By the time I paid the driver and climbed the brownstone steps, I had convinced myself that I hadn't been followed. Mostly. Fritz opened the door before I rang. He gave me a look that could have been translated as, "You're late for something you haven't been told about." "Where is he?" I asked. "In the office," Fritz replied. "Waiting." The word carried a weight only a chef who has cooked for Wolfe can infuse it with. Waiting, in Wolfe's dictionary, is a form of suffering reserved for lesser beings. I went straight in. Wolfe was behind his desk, hands tented, eyes closed, not asleep, but doing that meditative palming trick he uses when he's thinking about something unpleasant. The air in the office felt thick, like he'd been compressing molecules out of irritation. He didn't open his eyes when I entered. "Report." "If I sit first," I said, "will you promise not to explode before I finish?" "No." "Speak." I sat anyway. "We have a problem," I began. "That," Wolfe said without opening his eyes, "is redundant." I withdrew the folded wax paper and placed it on his desk. His eyes snapped open at the sound like a cat hearing a mouse sneeze. "What is that?" "A sample," I said. "From La Fiamma's walk-in. Someone used cinnamon, or something cinnamon-colored, to write a message on the venison." His brows drew together. "On the meat?" "Yes. A note." "What note?" "Check the wine." His scowl deepened. Confound it. Why are people using kitchens as blackboards? "And why," he asked sharply, "was someone near the venison?" "Because someone's been moving through that kitchen like they own stock in it," I said. "They toppled a pot, used the walk-in as a message board, left behind a footprint in the alley, and scared your fellow chef half to death. And then there's the crate of Barolo." Wolfe's eyes twitched at the word Barolo. If you ever want to get a reaction out of Nero Wolfe, threaten his sense of order, relevance, or culinary integrity. Preferably all 3. Explain, he said. So I did. Everything. The intermediary, the party, the recipe delivered under a door. The crate of wine dropped off by a courier who didn't belong. The mysterious bottle, designated for the target. Daniel disappearing out the back. The message written on the meat, and the final declaration from the messenger. The stew wasn't the target. Someone at the table was. I talked for 7 uninterrupted minutes. Wolfe didn't move once. When I finished, he reached for the wax paper, sniffed the powder lightly, all pretense of dismissiveness gone. He closed the paper, set it aside, and pressed his fingertips together. When Wolfe presses his fingertips together, it's the intellectual equivalent of cocking a rifle. This is no dalliance, he said quietly. This is organized and deliberate. Agreed. You believe the wine is the intended delivery mechanism? Yes. Based on what? Everything. Access, timing, secrecy, and the fact that the message didn't say, check the stew. They shifted focus when the target changed. Wolfe nodded once. Then the tampering in my kitchen was not rehearsal. It was calibration. Someone wished to refine their method under varying conditions. That is sufficiently vile to demand personal intervention. Well, I said, that's fortunate, because the dinner starts in about 4 hours. Wolfe frowned. And you propose what exactly? Going back, I said, holding the place together until the guests arrive, and figuring out which bottle is meant for the target, or which guest is meant for the bottle. He considered that. You cannot make a confrontation in the dining room. There will be a scene, and scenes lead to police. Which we don't want. No. He shut his eyes for a moment. The murderer, if murderer he is, has engineered this meticulously. He will not be deterred by the mere absence of convenience. He has built confirmations into his plan. He will not rely on chance. I nodded slowly. So he'll need a moment to ensure the target receives the correct bottle. He'll want verification. Yes, Wolfe said, and that verification is the moment when he exposes himself. So I wait for it. You do not wait, Wolfe said sharply. You prepare. You will return to La Fiamma immediately. You will position yourself so you may observe every bottle, every pour, every hand that touches the wine. You will prevent the target from receiving the designated bottle. And then? And then, Wolfe said, I shall summon the guests. That made me blink. You're coming to the restaurant? He snorted. Certainly not. They will come here. I stared. You want me to kidnap a private dinner for 8 and reroute it to your office? No, he said. You will tell Marco to postpone the service. Inform the guests that a complication in the kitchen requires a consultation. Then you will escort them here. Escort them, I repeated slowly. As in 8 people who may or may not be armed, who may or may not be planning a murder tonight. Bring them here, Wolfe said. I will unmask the culprit in my office, where I control the environment. I exhaled. They're not going to like it. They need not like it, Wolfe said. They need only comply. And if they don't? Wolfe opened his eyes and leveled them at me like twin brass knuckles. Then, Archie, he said, you may inform them that they are welcome to proceed with their murderous intentions elsewhere. But if they prefer discretion, survivability, and a chance of leaving tonight unincarcerated, they will come to me. I stood. All right, I'll tell Marco to brace himself, and I'll keep my eyes glued to that wine crate. I reached the door, but Wolfe stopped me with one word. Archie. I turned back. Be circumspect. That's my middle name, I said. Pfui, he replied. Then I was out the door again, heading back toward a restaurant where someone had already crossed the line between sabotage and homicide. Only this time, Wolfe was officially in the game. And when Wolfe plays, someone always ends up checkmated. I made it back to La Fiamma faster than was strictly legal, which is one of the perks of New York traffic. If you look determined enough, Every cabbie assumes you're either a surgeon or a hitman and moves accordingly. By the time I reached the front entrance, my pulse had settled into a smooth, steady rhythm. Steady enough, at least, to walk into a restaurant where at least 3 people had already been used as pawns in someone's homicidal chess game. Inside, the dining room was no longer empty. Staff moved about quietly, resetting silverware, arranging glasses, lighting votives. On the surface, it looked like a restaurant prepping for an upscale dinner service. Underneath, the air held tension you couldn't cut with anything less than a steak knife. Marco spotted me before I made it halfway across the floor. He looked like a man who had aged 5 years in the last 40 minutes. His relief at seeing me bordered on religious. "Tell me you brought help," he said. "I brought Wolfe," I said. His shoulders sagged. "He's coming." "No, he's summoning." Marco blinked. "Summoning who?" "The guests, all of them, to his office." For a moment, he simply stared at me like I'd announced the building was floating 3 inches off the foundation. Then he rubbed his temples. "They'll never agree," he said. "These are not people who follow instructions." "Then you'll be surprised," I said. "Because Wolfe's instructions aren't invitations. They're gravitational forces." He exhaled shakily. "You're sure?" "I'm positive. He wants the entire party moved to the brownstone. The dinner will happen there." Marco choked. "Fritz will—" "No one," I said, "is serving dinner. This is a safety play. Wolfe needs the suspects in one room under his control. And before you argue, remember this. Wherever tonight's killer is hiding, they're counting on this restaurant to give them access. We're removing the board from beneath their pieces." Marco sagged against a chair. "And if they refuse to go?" "Then we improvise," I said. "But first, we need everyone in one place for introductions." I glanced around the room. "Where's the messenger?" Marco gestured toward the hallway leading to table 7. I found him there, exactly where I'd left him, sitting stiffly like a man pretending to be invisible. He looked up, and the fear in his eyes had ripened into something more potent. Dread. "Did you speak to them?" he asked. "No," I said, pulling out a chair. "But you're going to help me deliver the message." His mouth went dry instantly. "Me?" "Yes, you. Because if I do it alone, they'll assume it's a ruse. If you do it alone, they'll assume it's a trap. But if we do it together, they'll assume it's something they don't want to make assumptions about." He swallowed. "And if they ask why?" "Tell them the truth," I said. "There's been interference. The kitchen has been compromised. The chef cannot guarantee the safety of the meal, and the only way to proceed with discretion is to move the dinner off-site." Marco arrived behind me, wringing his hands. "Archie, the guests, some of them, they have reputations." "Everyone has a reputation," I said. Some are just better advertised." Before he could argue, the maître d' approached with that expression of brittle professionalism people wear when trying very hard not to panic in front of customers. "They're here," he said. Right on cue, the front door opened. The first guest entered, a tall man in a coat too expensive to be anything but a statement. Behind him came another, shorter, with the look of a banker who made his fortune in industries best left unnamed. And behind him, 3 more arrived, all dressed like they wanted anonymity but spent too much on fabrics to achieve it. The final trio came in as a cluster, laughing softly, the kind of laugh that sounded rehearsed. 8 men in total. No women, no warmth. Every one of them carried the same thing in their eyes. The knowledge that tonight was not a social occasion but a negotiation of sorts. Whether the negotiation involved dinner or a hit was the part only one of us knew. Marco and the messenger moved forward together. I stepped to the side, observing. "Gentlemen," Marco began, voice trembling but game, "there has been an unforeseen complication in the kitchen, a matter requiring private consultation." That got their attention. Across 8 faces, Curiosity flickered, and behind it, something else. Wariness. The tallest man spoke. His voice was smooth but carried the bite of someone accustomed to control. "What complication?" he asked. The messenger stepped forward. "The dinner must be moved to another location." That got a different reaction, a ripple of surprise, irritation, and calculation. The men exchanged glances. Silent, coded, rapid. One of them asked, "Why?" "Security," the messenger said quickly. "The kitchen has been compromised, temporarily. We've arranged a private location for the meal. Same menu, same timing." "Where?" the tall one asked. I stepped in. Nero Wolfe's brownstone. You could have heard a pin drop on a velvet cushion. The tall man frowned. "Wolfe? The detective?" "Yes," I said. "You all ordered an evening of privacy. You're going to get it, in a room where no one can interfere. No interruptions, no back doors, no stray kitchen staff." A few of them stiffened, but not in opposition, in something closer to recognition. The tall man glanced at the group, then nodded once. "We go." Just like that. Marco exhaled audibly. The messenger sagged like a marionette with half its strings cut. I wasn't as impressed with their compliance, because now that I'd seen them together, I knew something Wolfe hadn't asked but would want to hear. These 8 men weren't business associates or old friends. They were rivals, competitors, predators who understood one another too well to trust one another. Which meant the target wasn't the weakest link in the chain. It was the strongest, the one someone needed removed to shift power, and I had exactly 40 minutes to get them all to Wolfe before the killer made another move. "Gentlemen," I said, gesturing toward the door, "your cars are waiting." They followed without a word, and as we stepped into the night, I realized something that made the hair on my neck go vertical. Someone in that group knew exactly which bottle in the Barolo crate was meant for the target, which meant someone in that group had been in the restaurant earlier. And judging by the controlled calm on their faces, he was still perfectly comfortable walking to what he believed would be his victory dinner. Wolfe was going to enjoy this. I'd been in tight spots before, but escorting 8 men who each looked like they kept an attorney, a private jet, and a grudge within arm's reach was a new notch on the belt. The ride uptown was quiet. Too quiet. Some watched the city blur by, some watched me, and 1 or 2 watched the others like they were inspecting future gravestones. When we reached the brownstone, Fritz opened the door with the kind of polite dread a man reserves for unexpected dinner guests carrying metaphorical dynamite. Wolfe was in the office, of course, leaning back in his chair like he'd been cast in marble. Only his eyes moved, slow, sharp, measuring each man as he filed in. I shut the door behind us. The room felt suddenly small. Wolfe cleared his throat once. "Gentlemen," he said, "you have been inconvenienced. That is regrettable. Yet since the alternative was poisoning, I trust you will bear it." That got their attention. A ripple of alarm passed through the group. No one spoke. No one needed to. Wolfe nodded toward me. "Mr. Goodwin will recount the relevant events." So I did. Short, clean, factual. Not a flourish in the bunch. The recipe delivered under a door, the tampered spices, the message written on the venison, the crate of Barolo delivered anonymously. And finally, the messenger's revelation that the stew wasn't the target. Someone at this very gathering was. When I finished, Wolfe took over. His voice was calm, the still surface of a lake you don't notice is frozen until you step on it. "You were meant to dine tonight," he said. "One among you was meant to die." The instrument was a bottle of Barolo, marked by method known only to the conspirators. The bottle would have been handed to the target without suspicion, because it is, apparently, his habit. One man shifted. Barely. But I saw it. The faint tightening of a jaw, the instinctive glance toward the crate that wasn't here. Wolfe saw it too. "Let us be done with coyness," he said. "The target is Mr. Harland Vance." A tall man, the first to enter the restaurant earlier, froze. His face didn't move, but the room around him did ever so slightly, as 6 men recalibrated their posture, and one man, the shortest of the group, took half a step away. Vance's voice was low, even. "On what basis do you identify me?" Wolfe lifted a finger. "On the basis of habit. The messenger revealed the target always accepts the designated wine. You, Mr. Vance, are known for choosing the rarest bottle at any table, often to impress or dominate. A psychological vulnerability your enemies understand well." Vance's eyes hardened, but he said nothing. Wolfe continued, "But that only identifies the victim. The murderer identifies himself." The room tightened. "And he does so," Wolfe said, "by access." His gaze slid to me. "Archie." I nodded. "We found a footprint in the alley behind the restaurant. Someone left through the back after tipping the stew pot. Someone with access to the kitchen, but not belonging to it." Wolfe's voice sharpened. "A staff member. Temporarily." Vance stiffened. "Temporarily?" Wolfe pointed at the shortest man in the group, the one who had stepped away. His face flushed the color of overripe cherries. "Mr. Titus Dolph," Wolfe said. The man blinked. "Me? That's absurd." "On the contrary," Wolfe said. "The delivery staff saw you this morning, wearing a server's apron. You dismissed them with a fabricated story about inventory checks, and you were seen again, exiting the alley door, moments after the stew was spilled." Dolph paled. "That's not you also," Wolfe continued. "Placed the message on the venison. A message not meant for the chef, but for me. You wanted interference blamed on an outsider, someone you believed would panic and abandon the dinner." Marco sucked in a breath, stunned. Dolph stepped backward, voice cracking. "You can't prove that. I was in that kitchen." "Incorrect," Wolfe said. "You can be proven by handwriting." Archie stepped forward, because that was my cue. I slid the recipe onto Wolfe's desk. Wolfe tapped it. This recipe was written by a man accustomed to architectural precision. The same hand annotated financial ledgers for Vance's company years ago. A disgruntled former advisor whose career dissolved after Vance dissolved his partnership. Dolph broke. "Like a bridge under too much weight," he sagged, shaking his head and muttering as if denial were a structural tool. "It was justice," he spat finally. "He destroyed me, my work, my future. He makes power plays at dinner tables. I thought—" His breath hitched. "I thought it poetic." Vance stared at him, no anger, just cold assessment. "So you meant to kill me with wine?" "Yes," Dolph whispered. "Something slow, something elegant." Wolfe grunted. "Poisoning is neither elegant nor poetic. It is cowardly." That landed like a stone. Fritz, who had been standing silently behind me, nodded in agreement so vigorously I worried for his neck. Wolfe flicked his hand. "Archie, telephone Inspector Kramer." Dolph sagged into a chair. The rest of the men stood silent, the threat that once pointed at one of them now redirected to the man who had walked in among them as an equal. 10 minutes later, Kramer arrived, blustering through the door with the usual mix of suspicion and gratitude he reserves specifically for Wolfe's cases. Dolph went quietly, which was the first sensible thing he'd done all night. Once the door closed and silence settled again, Wolfe sighed, a deep, weary sound like a man who'd just been served a dish under-seasoned by fate. "The dinner is cancelled," he announced. Marco nodded vigorously. "Yes, absolutely." Vance looked at Wolfe. "I owe you." "No," Wolfe said. "You owe Mr. Goodwin. He did the labor. I merely observed." I'll admit I didn't hate hearing that. The guests dispersed soon after, stepping back into the night with a mixture of relief and bruised ego, and after the last one left, the brownstone settled again, into that deep, warm quiet it saves for evenings when Wolfe has something to mull over. Fritz brought beer for me, Caesar for Wolfe. He lifted his glass. A man, Wolfe said, should not allow his appetites to become predictable. It makes him vulnerable. That's one way to look at it, I said. And another, Wolfe added, is that revenge is the most vulgar of spices. It overwhelms everything. I clinked my glass. And also tastes terrible, I said. Wolfe snorted. Dinner was late that night, but peaceful, free of sabotage, footprints, or coded death threats. Fritz served chicken fricassee. Wolfe ate with the satisfaction of a man whose universe had been restored to order. And I leaned back in my chair, feeling the pleasant exhaustion of a day that had almost ended with a poisoned billionaire, 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 billionaire.